Hello and welcome to this episode of FireDEV. Usually it's a fireside chat with people in the industry. It's still the case today, but it is multiple people in the industry today. It is three people. We have Parker One, Evan Bell, and Adam Zelenay. And this is the first panel, one of many. And I'm just going to let everyone introduce themselves. And then what we're going to do is just go into the gaming industry, talk about, some VR kind of stuff, some Web3, and see where the conversation takes us. So I'll hand it over to Adam to introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks, Frahan, for having me. My name is Adam, and I'm a product manager consultant currently with a new gig coming up. So hopefully there's going to be a cool new update on my LinkedIn very soon. And I focus on product management, especially in mobile games. And my focus and specialization, if you will, is in live operations.
Fantastic. So I'll hand it over to Parker now.
Hi, my name is Parker One, and I'm a gameplay engineer
Parker,
primarily.
can't really hear you. Can you?
Oh,
Uh,
is that is that better?
a little bit. Any chance you can?
Okay, give me. Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. I'll also try to project a little bit. But yeah, my name is Parker One, and I'm a gameplay engineer primarily. But nowadays I'm running my own game studio. I've been, at a AAA game developer at one point working on Halo Infinite. Nowadays, I'm working on my own company where initially we wrote some products around scripting languages and visual scripting and whatnot. But we've shifted our focus recently to more of a actual just game studio. So I'm just doing a lot of AAA game consulting and game development.
Okay, fantastic. And I'll let Evan introduce himself now. And before he does, a little shout out to Evan, a little thank you, because these panels were his idea. And let you introduce yourself now, Evan.
Hi, my name's Evan. I'm a technical product manager at Frostbite in the core systems space, where we really own all of the glue of the engine that holds the whole thing together. I've been in the game industry since 1999, and I've worked in a number of roles, mostly on the programming side, and I've worked mostly in the console space, although I do have one MMO for PC under my belt as well. And I'm happy to be here. And I cannot take credit for the panel because you do all the work running the podcast, hosting the podcast, finding the guests. So I'm just happy to play a small part.
So, I would like to first ask, what's the, biggest game each one of you has, worked on?
Wow. This, I mean, this is a tricky question because how do you define the biggest? Like the biggest in terms of
Let's
active
just say
players, or
units sold, or if it's publicly, public knowledge that he made so much
okay,
money, for example.
yeah, okay. I guess this is a subjective question. Um, but I can say personally, for me, it was when I joined. I think it was my third company where I worked. I started as a live ops designer back about it was about 5 years ago. It was in Barcelona for a company called ZeptoLab, and I worked on a project called CATS, and that's an abbreviation for Crash Arena Turbo Stars. And that game, it won the Game of the Year award in Google Play, I believe, in 2017. I think I made 2016 or 2017. And it already, when I joined, the game already had a steady player base, and therefore it was actually quite an interesting project to start developing live operations. It was a great school for my further career because it's much. I would say it's. I don't want to say it's easier. It depends how you look at it, but it's. I guess a little easier for a product manager and live operations to work with a game that already has a steady player base. So because at that point you most likely have a lot of data to work with, and therefore you're not working with thin air. You don't have to do as many experiments to find out what people react to. I don't know, how do you guys feel about this? Do you find games that already have a steady player base difficult to work with, or how do you see this?
What about you, Evan? Because obviously you've worked on, a variety of titles over the years, especially at EA. How do you find it?
I kind of have both perspectives because when I worked on the Old Republic, I worked on the initial development for almost 3 years. So before we had users, so I was there when it launched. I was not a product manager though; I was just a senior software engineer. So we focused on like making the game. But I rejoined that team several years later during the launch of the Knights of the Fallen Empire expansion, and um, we focused the focus of my role was leading the server team at the time, and we were just always trying to make sure the service was robust, and the performance was robust, and the user experience was consistent. So it was really just like keeping our current players happy with opportunities that we had identified. But most of those opportunities were identified not looking at like telemetry data from users, but looking at the data coming from the service itself to see like what things are slow that could be faster, what could be responsive. So we're kind of looking at it on this kind of second order data. So but it should have cumulatively a net positive impact for players, whether that's latency or load time to get into PvP matches or like whatever they experience. Those things working faster and smoother, more responsive, fewer dropped connections, those types of things.
Okay, and would the Old Republic be the most successful game you've worked on? Let's just say in terms of, units shipped, or I guess well, it's free to play now, and with some, DLC that you can, pay for, but just in terms of users, or is there another game?
Well, in terms of probably strictly like commercial success, Battlefield 4 is far and away the most successful title I've ever worked on. The Old Republic was the biggest title in terms of like the scope and the complexity of launching it. And the team size was also the largest. So I can look at it several different ways, like what was the hardest, what was the largest, what was the most successful, those types of things. But I would probably say that the Old Republic was the hardest and the largest in terms of like the size of the game that we shipped. I mean, it has 8 full single player RPG experiences in it for each class. For example, I think it might still hold the Guinness World Record for most recorded VO in a game. At the time it came out, it did, and it would be a very hard to catch that. Um, but maybe modern GTA's might have exceeded that.
Yeah, because I remember when the Old Republic came out, it was a big deal. There was that much, voiceover in an MMORPG because it just hadn't been done to that scale before. It's usually left to the RPGs of the world, like Knights of the Old Republic, for example. But yeah, they pushed that very heavily, and I think it shows in I guess, the quality of the game and the fact that people keep going back and playing it. And there's a lot of DLC that just keeps coming out. I always look forward to the CGI trailers. Does anybody else love the CGI trailers of Star Wars: The Old Republic here?
Well,
I did have a phase where I just watch all of them back to back to back. Because
I
uh,
they're
feel like I
really
have that
cool.
phase every year,
I
once a
re-
year.
I completely agree. I remember watching the trailer, like I don't know like 10 years ago when it was, and I knew I was sold on this game. I just wanted it. Wasn't it
Oh,
the one with this like this spaceship crashing into this warehouse with the Siths jumping out of the spaceship?
yes. I think was that the first ever trailer that they released?
That was the final launch trailer because there were like 4 trailers, 3 or 4, where they connected them. Like they're kind of different, introducing different principal characters that you would meet when you play the game. But that was the last one
That was the
where
last one.
they attack the space station and they recover the planet Korriban, which is the Sith homeworld. Sorry to get a little bit into Star Wars lore, but that's what's happening in that trailer where they have that big fight in the hangar.
That was so epic. That
Oh
was
yeah.
good days.
Oh yeah. Like whenever I watch them, I just feel like, can Disney not just make a Star Wars movie or TV show like that? One, obviously set in the older times in the Old Republic, but also that level of action as well. So, what about you, Parker? What's the biggest game that you've worked on? Would it be Halo?
Yeah, I mean, like that's the only game I've really shipped, and it was a gigantic project. I don't know if I'll ever really top the scale of that ever again in my career. But yeah, that'll be it. And also just in terms of the involvement I had with it, like because like spent a lot of hours, on that game, and nowadays like my focus is a little bit more kind of diversified because there's a lot of like administrative stuff, or like I'm like doing some contract work plus like doing our own game and stuff, and I don't know if that situation will really change um as like my kind of scope as like a and not just like a game developer, but like a person like in the game industry doing like all sorts of other things. Like I don't know if I'll ever be able to just kind of sit down and focus on building things like the way I did on Halo Infinite ever again. So yeah, probably Halo is probably the biggest project. Also like the scope of stuff I've just like the raw amount of stuff I put in, just the budget, my sales, all that. It's a gigantic thing.
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah.
So, that leads me on to, one of the first big topics of, today's panel, which is, the present and future state of single player games. Because obviously, Parker, you worked on Halo Infinite. Evan, you worked on a variety of titles, including Battlefield 4, which, they had obviously a multiplayer component and a very successful one as well, to be fair. Like, I remember a lot of people loved that multiplayer component. But they had a single player which was very meaty, very in depth, and people loved playing that. So, but then you've obviously worked on a game that is an MMORPG, and probably I would say one of the best ones ever released. Still to this day is supported with new DLC. And then you got Adam, who's is it fair to say, Adam, that you've heavily been focused in the mobile industry?
Yeah, I mean that's my soul focused. Um, it's a yeah, it obviously it's video games, but it contrasts completely differently to what Evan and Parker are doing in with AAA, right?
Oh yeah, 100%. And like, what's really interesting about that is, like pre-mobile, so pre what 08 when the Apple App Store came out, and really what the early 2010s when games were really getting into the full swing with Clash of Clans, with what Candy Crush, those sort of titles. Consoles and PC was still generally the main way of playing games, and a big part of it was still single player experiences, whereas now it's become heavily mobile. So a lot of the work that Adam's doing, for example, and it's also become a lot of it's become online. And what Parker worked on with Halo Infinite, there's been obviously I'm sure, Parker, you remember me asking you about the single player aspect and the co-op aspect of that, were like a game that was typically promoted heavy. I mean, the franchise, not Infinite per se, but like it was typically promoted as that game, couch co-op. You can play up to 4 players, and like that was like the go-to game. And it was like a solid game single player, solid game online, and then a solid game co-op, whether that was local or online as well. And then they promised those features, removed them, and I just feel like the single player games are so rare these days. Like, how do you guys feel about just that notion that single player games are just a lot rarer? So it's a rare
I
breed.
I don't know if it's so rare. Like, I mean, there's still a lot of money being put into it. There's, I like off the top of my head know like, a couple studios just like in the area right now that are, the, just very newly established AAA studios that are, like recently just got funding and they're trying to build out like open world games and all that, or like recently EA putting out uh Immortals of Avium, like that fantasy FPS shooter. That's like a game coming out. Obviously Starfield coming out. Like I still think like single player games still have their place in the industry and doing pretty well. But that could also be me just saying that because I that's where my focus is, and maybe that's like why I kind of see that aspect of the industry so much. Because I'm always kind of paying attention to it. What other project can I get, dip my foot into? So like I don't necessarily think like like there it's definitely true that like the market size for like if you look at like PC, Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo, and then like mobile, it's like a order of magnitude like difference between mobile and like everything else, right? Like mobile just like 100-fold bigger than like everyone. So I think it's very easy to kind of see like, oh, like the game industry as a whole is like moving away, but I think it's just kind of growing. And I don't think there's like people that I don't think the appetite for single player games is going away anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, like the appetite, 100%. Because I know myself personally, and when I'm looking online on comments, for example, whether those comments are good or bad on trailers or reviews, like single player is definitely a wanted feature in a lot of games. But I think you make an interesting point that like this, like some of the titles you mentioned, like Starfield, for example. Yes, that's obviously has single player, and it's a big launch that's just come out, but it's from a big studio, a lot of money thrown at it. Because like the main concern I have with the single player industry today isn't the big boys. Because Call of Duty, apart from what Black Ops 4, I want to say it was, they didn't have a single player campaign, but every other one has had it. And there'll be the Uncharted, there'll be the Horizons of the world, all of that's coming out. But I remember when I was a kid growing up, like on Xbox 360, PS3, you had titles that honestly weren't 9 or 10s, but they were good 7 or 8s, and they were like on a medium budget, and they were a nice experience, almost like a filler game between like a big release. I remember Army of Two, Stranglehold, Time Shift. None of those games I would say they're like game of the year worthy, but they were nice alternative single player experiences. I feel like a lot of those type of titles and studios have gone away, and they've just again focused on mobile. But mobile is so cheap to get into, you can kind of see why. Like, how do you feel about it, Evan? Because you've obviously been at EA where they've done both. Like, they're doing mobile and killing it. They're doing console, PC. Like, they're doing everything.
Yeah, and I've worked on both. So the shift that I've seen is that for large AAA games, we're getting fewer of those, but they're very big and they have very big teams, and the success that they're aiming for is very large. But there's certainly, at least recently, there's been a crop of them. Immortals, Starfield, Baldur's Gate 3, like boom, 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 and the calendar, those all dropped pretty close to each other. So it you can't say they're dead. I do agree that the kind of the mid tier is vanished, but instead of the mid tier, we have indies now. Like you look on Steam and other like indies, like places to buy indie games, or if you go to the Game Developers Conference and you see like the Indie Game Jam, there's overwhelmingly single player games. So and it's and it I love that because they get to explore some the oddities and really interesting ideas that wouldn't survive review for a game that has a budget of 100 million plus. Like, you can't be too experimental. So I think it's still a very thriving piece of game development, but the way the bean counters look at it is they want revenue sustained over a long period of time, and the only thing that offers that is live service. I'd also point out a difference between like when I was in middle school and high school and stuff, internet penetration and availability was very low to non-existent. So the only games being made were single player games. Like, it wasn't Intel Quake, like Doom, trying to get on a modem and call your friend to play Doom was really difficult to even get that to work. Um, but when Quake and like the original Unreal Tournament, like that kind of was the the age of multiplayer had started, had it arrived, and then the penetration of broadband has really just made the types of games you can make and the user experience for those games a lot better. So it there is this other platform. It's not just PlayStation, PC, and Xbox. The other platform is the internet, and it's robust and ubiquitous now. So that's why multiplayer games are a thriving part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I do like that new, aspect of single player games. You know, you mentioned the indie games, and like, those sort of smaller titles like Firewatch is one that just, came to mind, probably with all the heat that we've had in the UK over the last few days. But, those sort of titles, you just didn't see like 15, 20, 30 or so years ago. Like you said, it was just AAA, and then you had some mid tier games, as well. And I would say the ones that were doing the smaller games probably did, I guess what Flash online, games. They just weren't, doing the indies. So the mid games are gone, but then you've got this, whole, batch of indie games, whether that's on like PlayStation or whether it's on Steam, whatever it is. And even big studios, even they've, created indie like games where they're smaller in scale and scope, cheaper in price, and but again they have like an indie vibe to them, because obviously you've got indie developers. Like I had a guy on the podcast a couple episodes, he's done, Nathaniel Weiss, and he made the game Songbringer, which is on pretty much most modern platforms including console and mobile, and he's doing the sort of like side game, Wraithbinder. And he's just a sole developer. He's doing all the artwork, all the coding. He was doing a lot of the marketing as well. He's with a publisher, but he's doing like, coding, artwork, and audio, all all himself. So you have that aspect of it, and then you have the aspect of it like a few people, like a team, and then like a big company doing a smaller game as well. So I definitely do enjoy the indie game. So even though I can moan and complain all day long that single player games, the I'll say like the number of you, I think we'll all agree relatively like as a percentage, single player games have definitely reduced. One, there's a lot more games out there now, plenty of platforms. Obviously on mobile, there's games coming out like probably every day. Yeah, literally every day. And even the big boys are releasing them on a regular basis as well, because there's so quick to develop them compared to a console and a PC. But I do enjoy some of the alternatives that have also come about, like indie titles. So, like, how do you feel about it, Adam? So obviously
Yeah,
you're in mobile.
yeah. Well, for first and foremost, I mean, I'm to answer your question, I'm not gonna look at it from the point of view of from the industry that I work in, which is in mobile games, but as a gamer, right? And I think it kind of depends. And feel free for you guys to jump in, but it depends on how you define what's an single player or a multiplayer game, because I feel that you could classify in general three types of games, right? You could have your pure single player games, which would be with no multiplayer component at all, which would be your what you just mentioned, any type of indie game, right? Whereas I find that's kind of rare nowadays. I mean, at least from my experience, a lot of games have some form of online connection required, if nothing else, than for just to check that there is no hacks being done to the game's files, right? Then you have the other end of the spectrum, which would be a purely online game. That would be World of Warcraft, for example, or any type of MMORPG. But then is a third type of a third cohort or third third type of games, which I would call multiplayer games or single player games 1.5. And I can't think of any other better of any other game that would define this better than Elden Ring, because at its heart, it's a single player game, and the multiplayer or co-op or PvP, whatever you prefer, is purely optional. and you can opt in to the multiplayer if you want. If you don't, you can completely play the game single player. And what I actually appreciate about Elden Ring is that I'm a horrible player. I mean, I'm the worst player in the history of mankind. So I passed Elden Ring and finished Elden Ring completely with the help of other players. But assuming that you don't have internet connection, the game actually gives you the option to play, quote unquote, co-op with AI, with a computer controlled other characters. So, and this is the trend that I'm seeing, and you can see this also in Baldur's Gate 3. It's a single player game, but you have the option to play with your friends. And I'm not actually sure, I just bought it this Wednesday because it came out, but I'm not sure if you can seek other players that are not in your friends list and play with them. Um, and just to put my product manager hat on, I think this comes down to what sort of audience you want to target. And I specifically mentioned World of Warcraft as one of example because there's this very basic game design theory where you have four types of players, right? They're called Bartle's players types. And basically, it's a XY a chart that says that you have uh, players who we would call killers, achievers, socializers, or explorers. And that summarizes their core motivations. Now, if you have World of Warcraft, which is purely online, and you're playing with a clan, um, those would be most likely your killers if they're into PvP. So they really care about being the best, having the best equipment, and climbing up the leaderboards. And socializers, they care about what's going on, the clan interactions. They really care about logging in and chatting with their friends. But then the other types that you would have would be, one of them would be the explorers that I mentioned. And those players, for the most part, care about really exploring the world, uncovering, making sure that they explore each part of the map. They uncover each dungeon, that they manage to find all the hidden objects in the game. Now, you don't need to have an online or multiplayer component for that necessarily. So what it comes down to is, who is your target audience. Now, I think it was you, Evan, who mentioned that indeed there is I love the term you used, bean counters, who care about revenue. And it's true that I think there is a correlation between having an online or a multiplayer component in your game, which would correlate with higher retention. And well, I guess we could fairly say most likely a higher, or let's say higher revenue games with an online component. But I think, and I'm speaking completely from my own subjective experience, that when you have your casual or mid-core players, um, those players don't have necessarily the time that they would need to dedicate to a game that's such as World of Warcraft, where you need to spend hours and hours, raiding and grinding to get the best loot, etc., etc. So, for those types of players, I think the current trend will indeed be to have those multiplayer 1.5 or single player, however you want to look at it, single player 1.5 present, where you want to log in for an hour, maybe two after work, before you continue to your family obligations. That's definitely my case. And one of the curses of being or having a game design background, because I started as a game designer in 2016 after I switched careers, is that you kind of start to see game features and the overall direction of the game from the perspective of the target audience. And this is now that I'm 35 and I have different types of obligations. I don't have 8 hours to game in a day. I can definitely see this being the main trend where sometimes I just want to log in, do some daily quests and log out. And sometimes if I want to socialize a little bit, maybe invite a friend or meet some strangers online and go on a quest with them. So I think this is going to be the trend in the future where multiplayer is a nice addition, not necessarily a requirement.
Yeah, I mean, and there's like the interesting point you raised there, which is DRM, and it's like, how does everyone personally feel about the state of DRM in many games today? I don't think it's really, even though it's obviously in mobile games, I don't think it's hit it the same way it has with consoles and PC games.
Well, are you speaking of a specific user impactful DRM? Because when you buy a game on PlayStation Store and you download it to your console, you have the right to use it as the user who purchased it. But if you log in onto another console, you could download it again, especially if your console, I don't know, lose it in a flood or something. So any walled garden is a DRM enforced garden, but the user experience doesn't really. It's the same as any other walled garden, and lots of users interact with walled gardens now. So I'm kind of curious what you what's the meat of the question you're trying to um, shine a light on?
Okay, so like specifically what you've just mentioned, I have no problem with. I think that's fine. The main issue I have with, you buy a single player game, you install it, download whatever updates there are, and then you can't play the single player, like the single player portion of the game. You might have multiplayer and single player, for example, or the single player, and you can't play it without either an active internet connection, even though you don't need the internet per se to play the game, actively when once it's loaded, or it needs to be constantly checked every X amount of time, like every day, every week, whatever. So obviously, I understand you need a connection for Fortnite. That's obvious. It's an online game. You need a connection for World of Warcraft. For the Old Republic. They're online games. I 100% understand that. But when you get a single player game, or a game that has a single player portion, like Call of Duty is a great example. There'll be times where it'll be installed and there'll be something that hasn't quite installed, but that's for the multiplayer, but you need it to basically verify files or something like that. That's basically the meat of the question, Evan.
Right, this sounds like it's more likely to impact PC users, but I guess it could impact console users. But I don't. The console itself is DRM because it's much harder to pirate
Mm-hmm.
console games, and I would say it's probably impossible to pirate the digital ones, the ones you just download. So yeah, the DRM for PC users is kind of all over the place. That is what I would call an intrusive user experience, where like the to play this game, I need to have a connection, like a heartbeat that validates that I'm logged in as myself on this account. Um, and yeah, so the reality is cheating and piracy are rampant on the PC, and these are attempts to slow that down. There's no one has any illusions at the developers that they can eliminate it. And sometimes the these decisions aren't made by the developers themselves; they're made by leadership at the much higher up the company level. What kind of DRM the the title will be require, um, and we also um, we do things to try to prevent cheating as well. So that's not so much about piracy, but it's about like it, protecting the quality of the service for other users. Um, but that can be intrusive for a user who gets falsely identified as cheating and can have their account locked and like be subject to a potential ban. So I would call that as intrusive as well. But there, um, the goal isn't to eliminate piracy; it's to eliminate cheating and protect the experience of users who don't cheat.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so it is like the always on DRM games where you just you need an active connection to even play the single player portion of it. I think that can be really annoying, especially when you even might not have the best internet connection either all the time or at the time, or for example, like there's a new update out and it's not letting you play until you've updated, but maybe the update's really big because we all know how updates get with modern games. They're like huge, and unless you have a really fast stable internet connection, you're gonna be waiting for a bit of time. I've just come to the belief and realization that whenever I get Call of Duty, I'm not playing the single player experience straight away. Like it's gonna be a little bit of time because I want to play the single player. There's always updates. There's always this and that. And then also there's the install part of it. Big installation, big update. Over 100 gig in total between the two, and it takes a fair bit of time. Even if you bought the game on a disc, like the disc these days is more as just an authenticator. It's no longer okay, you've got the game, it's X version, let's say version 1, you install that, you can play that. But if you want version 1.1, 1.5, 2, 3, or whatever that has performance upgrades, might have extra content, fixed bugs, whatever it is, you can update, but you don't 100% need that. So yeah, I think that is a real big issue. Like, how do you feel about it, Parker? Because you worked on Halo Infinite, and that had and still does kind of always on kind of DRM. It can get a bit annoying when you're trying to play with someone.
I don't like. I think there's like poorly implemented DRM, but like DRM as a concept, I don't think really is the issue. Like, and for me, like, I work at a fairly high level of like gameplay, and like not necessarily at like looking at the game as like a piece of software that needs to be distributed and validated and all that. So it was fairly uh invisible, pretty much like invisible to me at the level that I was like working at. But like it's like a DRM in like the industry as a whole. Like I think there are like valid reasons that people kind of come up with for like implementing various versions of this concept of DRM, and some turn out good and some turn out bad. And I think Evan was talking about like having it be intrusive for user experience. Yeah, that'd probably be kind of like the on the bad side of the spectrum, and then having it be kind of like invisible and all kind of like baked in. All I think my understanding with like things like Xbox, for example, is like almost some of those stuff is like literally baked into the machine and all that. So like that kind of stuff being like totally invisible to the user, I think that'd be like a good kind of a implementation of DRM related things. Yeah, so I think it's just like matter of like, because like it's not like when you say DRM there's like this one bit of code that you plug into every game, right? Like every team has their own set of people working on certain implementations that kind of provide a certain set of features, and as like Evan pointed out, a lot of the times like as directed by the leadership. So I think it's I don't think it's something we can really say. It's like, oh, like DRM is this or DRM is that. It's more like some teams kind of did it this way or some teams kind of did it that way, and it had its pros and cons. And some was very intrusive and some were totally invisible, and a lot of the times it's like somewhere in the middle. Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna make a statement, and I want to be honest, guys. Like, am I, correct in this statement, or am I, false? And tell me why. Like, so you're right, Parker, that DRM in in itself is not necessarily the issue. It's a good thing, and obviously, Evan talked about piracy and cheating. Mobile games, have a big problem with piracy. It's so easy, especially like obviously on iOS you still need to do a few things, with a jailbreak or some sort of a few extra steps. But with Google, obviously we won't go into it too much, but with APK this it's a lot easier to pirate titles. But like for me, it feels like the games that have the worst implemented DRM especially from the single play experience side, are like the big developers, like the big titles. Like, do you guys feel that way, or am I incorrect in saying that?
I mean, like playing games, like for me at least, like DRM has been like totally invisible. I think also like I think it also impacts people in different ways. Yeah, like if you have like a bad internet connection, you're probably gonna have a bad time with like a always online requirement. Um, but at least for me, like because I do all my work remotely, it is something I kind of always ensure that I have like a very robust internet connection that's really fast. So I guess like even when it is intrusive, uh, like it's been totally invisible to me for practically all games I've played, uh ever in my adult life. When I was a teenager, yeah, like I I may have torn to the game or two, but like
Who hasn't?
not
I think I think anyone that's a serious gamer that says they haven't done anything along those lines is just 100%
well,
lying.
yeah, when I was a kid, I was definitely torn into the game or two. But like nowadays, it's like it's completely invisible to me. So and also like it's not necessarily something that really comes up very much in online discussions that I've seen or followed. So it's I don't know. Like I really haven't really seen it or been impacted by it too much. At least not recently.
Okay. How about the rest of you guys? How do you feel about the statement I made?
So I don't play PC games anymore, so I don't have that experience. But I do remember one of the earliest forms of DRM was you have to have the CD in the tray, even though it fully installs the game on your hard drive. It's not there for a technical reason. It's there to read the CD key. For modern consoles, short of hacking the hardware, there's no way to get around the kind of invisible DRM because the executables won't. A pirated executable won't load on it. If you like copy a disk, it won't load. So, and if you make a hack for hardware or any DRM system in the US, it's illegal. It's a felony, thanks to the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, if you share that hack with others. So that's a fun wrinkle out there. Kids, if you're doing this, you should be aware. I don't know how often that gets enforced because it's a pretty diffuse problem. Yeah, so yeah, I sympathize with the need for it, but I think anytime you punish legitimate users because of illegitimate users, that's a mistake, and you need to find a technical way around that. Because like if you're playing on a laptop and you're on a train, you might not have internet connection. You want to be able to play Assassin's Creed or whatever, right? There are legit use cases that certain DRM search solutions, I use that term in air quotes, run afoul of. So I think you should think user experience first. But I will say, especially for anti-intrusion type technologies that crash the executables for games when users try to do bad things, the people who complain that the game is crashy could be anyone. So on Reddit, the people trying to do bad things could be the ones that are making the most noise about bugs and crashes, because what they're doing is triggering the executables to shut down to prevent intrusive behaviors. So take it with a grain of salt when someone says that it's super crashy if your experience is not crashy at all.
Oh yeah, I think that's fair enough, because a lot of the people like you say, they'll moan about certain games crashing or certain game having this problem, but then if you genuinely bought it, you might not, and that's like the other thing, because we're all older. None of us are kids anymore. We all have jobs. We have responsibilities, families, all that sort of stuff. And I know as a result, that little bit of time that I do find out of my day or week to try and put into games, like the last thing I want to do is get the latest new game, spend top dollar for it, because obviously these big titles, Call of Duty, Halo, they cost the most. Obviously Halo, I just had it on Game Pass, so I didn't technically pay specifically for that, but the same principle still applies. I get that, put it in, I'm excited, or I get it after work, I put it in, it's 5, 6, 7 p.m. and then it's just like, you got to do this, or this server's down, and it's just like, I literally just want to play the single player. Like again, online, I 100% understand when there's issues. When there's you can't play because you don't have a stable enough connection or no connection. That's a given. But when that's not the case, and that is you know that's something I feel more like, because my internet connection, I would say, is a medium. It's not super fast, it's not slow, it's a decent one. So when there is something big, obviously Parker mentioned that because he's got a really solid, good connection. Unfortunately, the house that I'm in right now, the max you could get was in the UK is the BT 72 meg. You couldn't, because Virgin is a gigabit now. BT in the fiber to the premises options in certain houses is up to almost a gigabit. It's 900 meg basically. Let's just call it a gigabit as well. And but those options, just weren't available. And I think that's the other annoying thing, is it wasn't even that, oh, I didn't buy it. It's just I just don't have the option for it. And they are doing upgrades, but it's going to be a few years possibly before those upgrades by law get carried out. But that reminds me, like, I'm sure you all have heard stories of certain games doing certain funny stuff for if you pirate it, and as a result you can't play the game properly. Like, I remember when I was a kid, like Parker, I pirated, let's just say, a few games as well. And I remember the first Godfather, if you pirated it, you couldn't get into a vehicle. Like, it literally would not let you get into a vehicle. And like, I think the first or second mission, you had to get into a vehicle. So you were just there trying to press the button on PC to get in, and you was like, "What's happening?" And it was an anti-piracy mechanism. But instead of saying you can't load the game or we'll crash it, we just won't let you get into a vehicle.
Yeah. I just need to build on what you just said, Frahan, regarding the enforced DRM and online, always online requirement. Have you any of you guys played Diablo 4?
Not played it yet, but waiting to play it.
Well, actually, I was so much looking forward to playing this game. I mean, I wasn't one of the guys reading or studying up about it, but I just knew I wanted to play it and have a good time. And actually, during the summer, I moved to my summer house where there's a completely crappy internet connection, and I barely could find a company who would provide me like an internet coverage. I did find one. I had to buy a router, and I had to do it the old school way where I inserted the SIM card in it, and I had like a prepaid credit of 500 gigabytes. But the internet was super bad, like really, really bad. And I mean, I knew Diablo 4 had an always online requirement. It's just that I didn't know how it's gonna affect my gameplay, and you can't imagine my disappointment where the game was like a slideshow. I mean, there was especially during the weekends when I knew I wanted to play a bit more. I would just move back to the city just so I could play a little bit. And this is exactly what you said, Evan, where I really felt this was an intrusive DRM approach. Where, I mean, is it really necessary to have always online connection requirement for this type of game? I mean, I understand, I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, where the reason for this is that nobody's hacking the inventory or hacking the stats or whatnot. But I think there could be a much more elegant way to do it where, if you're offline, do what you want. If you want to ruin the experience for yourself, of course, feel free to do it. But the moment you go online, the server checks your data files and basically bans you if you've been tampering with it. Just like in the old days, right? I remember Warcraft 3 that had this approach. Um, because I felt that this was so over the top, and it was for me especially, and I'm assuming there's other players who don't have a great internet connection. It was so restricting. Like I genuinely wanted the single player experience. Wanted to play, see what the story was, maybe explore the world before I got to the end game content, which would be online indeed. But it was enforced online from the get go, and I felt that's not what I really wanted.
So in that you describe kind of two different solutions to different problems. And again, for the first one I'll mention, I'll put solution in air quotes. The always online for someone who wants to play single player is can create a bad user experience for all the reasons you just mentioned. The online games that actually want to have a good user experience for all their players, they need to be actively hostile to intrusion. So we definitely do those things to check if someone's trying to utilize an exploit or if they're doing anything hinky that they'll usually just get a disconnect. Like you'll get an account level ban after a certain number of attempts to use exploits or to load bad data. The thing is, online services, your save files are in the cloud, so you can't hack your progress and you can't get better equipment because it's all server authoritative data. You could do stuff like in a multiplayer game, use hacked DLLs to try to see through walls and do stuff like that. Certainly, there's a number of cheats that people even sell online for like Call of Duty and like Battlefield PC players. Uh, and again, they're not just ruining the experience for themselves; they're ruining the experience for the community. So, so those things are like they seem connected because it's all about what's mediated through the online connection. But I think those are the developer publisher is trying to solve two different um, scenarios there, and yeah, but they keep doing this. They keep making online requirements for single player games or single player portions of games that have an online component. So I believe that they've done the math and said like the number of players this we lose because of this is insignificant compared to the amount of piracy that we limit with it.
I actually quite curious here, if you don't mind me asking, from your experience, have you ever encountered or where you would actually, let's say, in Diablo's case, where they would take Diablo 3 as an example and collect some data to say, okay, like on average, this is how much hacks or intrusion attempts we've noticed in this time period, and somebody did the math and said, yeah, it's much more profitable or safe if we include the online requirement in the next sequel, or how is this approached? Because that's a big product decision.
Well, I think that again that those things are like hack to the reward cheaters want is to cheat in a multiplayer environment. So I think some people do like I want to have infinite health on my single player game, and whatever, more power to them. Like ruin the game as designed for yourself. And generally that's not something we worry too much about. It's the it's the other side where it's like you're trying to get some kind of advantage, either like in-game currency advantage or power advantage, or like another item duping. Going back to Diablo for years and years ago, the original Diablo was rife with item duping. So most exploits like that are taking advantages of bugs in the online game, and the developers will become aware of exploitable bugs, and that's when they can track like who's utilizing them and who's trying to utilize them. And there's also developers lurking on the forums for people to discuss these things and how to do them. So there's always a spy on this very small portion of the community that's trying to do this. So they get wise and they find those things, and um, I think it's viewed as too harsh as to just like auto ban someone for a single attempt. especially because of the potential for false positives. So that's why we have to tolerate a certain number of attempts before we kind of swing the hammer. And um, uh, yeah, what and how that relates and technologically to actually the DRM for just being connected is kind of game specific. So I wouldn't be able to comment on Diablo's case. And if I worked on it, I definitely wouldn't be able to comment.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I'm just curious because that's, we're discussing it here and it's a big decision. I'm just wondering what kind of inputs the developers get before they're able to make this decision whether there should be an always online requirement or not. I can imagine it's a combination of what you just said, a couple of spies lurking around the forums. I think everybody does that. You learn a lot about your game for sure. And yeah, I'm fairly sure they're also collecting data. They've got their data analysts and they're crunching the numbers, to determine whether it makes sense to have the always online requirement or not from, let's say, a statistical point of view.
I just assume, since we're such a data oriented um, industry, that they've done the math and have said that, like, yeah, there'll be some negative user sentiment for this stuff, but when you run the experiment, we make more money this way. Because that's really the end game is what does it affect? What is its effect on sales? The assumption is for people who play strictly online in their game that there is no, because they always want to be online. There's no negative impact for them, and for people who buy Diablo 4 to just play single player, they probably assume that most of them have internet connections. I think that's a pretty safe assumption these days for anyone who's buying a AAA game. Um, it's just the intermittency is the problem.
Hmm.
So I assume that they just have said, like, the negative impacts are known. Like no one assumes that these things don't happen, and that they're a lot for our bottom line, actual financial performance of this game. It's more important to ensure that we minimize piracy.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Well, I'm sure that they did some kind of a user research before that. Probably sent kind of have had their focus groups and send a couple of surveys just to get at least a hint of how the target audience or the majority of population might react. Because actually, this was one of the negative points that a lot of the reviewers mentioned, that there's always this always online component. And to be fair, I mean, I suggest you guys play the game. I think it's a great game, but it kind of pretends it does have this vibe of MMO. It pretends to be this always online game where the moment you log in, you should be surrounded with other players, etc. But the experience just feels so single player. Like the features don't necessarily support that. So I mean, that's, I guess, for another discussion at this point. But I think that's why it attracts so much negative attention. That there's always this always online requirement, but at heart, right now, it just feels like it's such a single player game.
Yeah, but I guess I would ask this question: did you stop playing it because of the always online requirement?
Well, no, that wasn't it.
So you were annoyed, and you may have posted about it, but you didn't stop playing because they also, like, especially if you comment on the game's forums themselves, uh, they can connect the dots between who's complaining and who's playing. And I've seen examples of players on forums saying, "I'll never play this game again," and the developer going, "Yeah, I could look and see that they were online playing when they wrote that."
Yeah, that's a classic. That's a classic.
They're probably the one that play the most.
Yeah, absolutely. The ones who play the most are the most
The-
vocal. In the,
They're the ones that are most passionate. It's like people that pirate a lot of movies and a lot of games. I bet you they spend a fair bit of money in that industry because they're so absorbed by it. They're so into it. Like the hence why they're going into that effort of pirating it, for example. So yeah, it's definitely some of the most vocal ones are definitely the ones that spend the most money, spend the most time, and yeah, like to see. Obviously, it's great when you're a developer and you have access to those statistics where you can see, oh yeah, that person's logged into the same account, he's online right now playing, and he's been on for like 3 hours.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there could there could be a lot said about this topic. I remember, especially in the old days, when like 2005 and six, like the golden era of World of Warcraft. Every time somebody would get upset about an update or something and would post about it on the BattleNet forums, and the title would be like, "I'm leaving this game," and there would be like this whole thread. People would just comment like, "Can I have your stuff? Can I have your stuff? Can I have your gear?" Like nobody would care, right? Because people were just complaining all the time. And one of the just to post a little anecdote, we've especially when we with my team when we were working on live games, and especially games that had a lot of players, as I mentioned in the beginning, like cats, for example. One of the golden rules that we've had in the live ops team was that if you release an event or do anything live ops related, um if it steers the community one way or another, and most frequently it's negative, like you're very rarely getting like positive feedback because we're free to play. So you know, if you do anything that the players like, you're most likely giving them free goodies and vice versa. If it steers the community, you probably did a good job. They react to it. They're reacting emotionally. And it shows that they care about the game, and they're going to start commenting about the balancing, about it being free to play friendly or unfriendly. They'll start complaining about players who spend money on the game, that they're getting unfair advantage. Again, I think that's a different topic, but the point is, if they wouldn't care, they would just churn. They would leave the game. The fact that they do comment shows that they care. Now, we need to strike a fine balance. You don't want to, piss people off that they're gonna leave and say goodbye. I'm never playing your game again, and they actually do it. But it's a good thing they, if they're commenting on forums, on Reddit, etc. It's a good thing. It means they care about your game and that they're still connected to it in one way or another.
Yeah, no, that's legitimate. I've heard a different anecdote where someone was doing, it wasn't in the game space, but someone was getting like a service, like a set top box service reviewed by like a focus group, and everybody in the focus group hated it. And the people developing it were actually excited because the fact that they were that angry meant they wanted to like it, and they were super disappointed that it didn't like meet their expectations or needs. Whereas if they had just been like shoulder shrug, like it's fine, they would have been more alarmed by that because they're like, oh, this focus group has no interest in this. We're totally off base, as opposed to our implementation of something they're interested in and it's flawed.
Yeah, 100%. You're hitting the nerve in one way or another. If they're reacting in this way, like, oh, this is not what we want. They know what they want, and they're still using your product. They're still playing your game. So you're slowly, it's like a homing missile. You're getting there, and it's an iterative process.
Oh yeah, like it's it's definitely an interesting one. When you're seeing people, post about it online, the interactions, that people have, and yeah, like gamers can definitely be very, passionate, and obviously with social media and online, with all the anonymity that goes along with it, and how easy it is to post, you can, people just freely post because I mean, rarely do you see people go into the launch of a game or some physical game event and saying these things. You might get a protest now and again, and you might get some boos, but that's usually something really terrible has been announced, like like a price point, for example. Remember when Phil Spencer got booed? Was it 2012, 2013? I want to say, for the Xbox One, when he announced the price of that. Like I remember, like the audio, like the I don't know whether it's security or somebody at the event actually was telling the audience to be quiet, effectively, because they were booing. They was obviously directing it to him, but it's more of just Xbox's decisions. But yeah, generally speaking, it is all online, so obviously that anonymity can be very crazy. But to talk about also single player, something else that has emerged over the last few years, that's a growing, small but a growing platform, is VR. And most of the experiences on VR, I would say, are single player experiences. So that that's very interesting. You've got this new immersive experience, this immersive hardware, console. Even when you look at the Quest headsets, they are standalone consoles, but they have very rich single player experiences, whether they're quick and easy to pick up like Beat Saber, or they're a bit more in depth like some of the Star Wars games, like Vader Immortal, for example, and Medal of Honor. Have you guys played much VR, and how do you feel about VR in general? Because I know some people just don't care about it.
I I played Half-Life Alex, and I thought that was really cool. And like one example I can come up with of like when VR kind of actually managed to be a good game. But I think in general, like there's just people, like as an industry as a whole, we have a lot to figure out in terms of like what does it mean for a game to be VR? Because like, when you play like first person shooters, there's a reason why they like all have a lot of similarities between them, because there's a lot of techniques going into the gameplay that make them feel good. Everything from like aim assist to like how the AI behavior is written to like how these things are designed. Yeah, and it seems like VR, it's like it's so different as a medium that it doesn't work the same way with the same rules for the like design and implementation of the game. And it seemed like Half-Life Alex was like one of like those instances where they kind of figured out like, okay, like it's kind of cool to have the weapons be a little bit more tactile and have it be something that you can really interact with and get good at. Whereas like that's a concept that literally doesn't exist for first person shooters, right? Like you just don't really have to worry about how you're aiming the gun. You just put the reticle on the thing and hit your trigger, and the bullet's going right down that right down that line. It seems like just as an industry as a whole, we just don't know how to make really VR games yet, and like what techniques we need to use, and how do we need to design the game to make it work in that medium. So it seems like it's you know the question of like, is it going to will we be as an industry be able to figure out like how to make VR games um while the interest in it lasts. um yeah but overall just kind of like a lot of big question marks, both from the players and the developers.
Yeah, I mean, Half-Life Alex, amazing game. Obviously, that was a triple A title, a top tier title, required a PC to play. It wasn't standalone, and obviously, you could play on a variety of headsets, but Valve have their own with Valve Index, and that was the optimal way to play. Yeah, they put a lot of effort into that game in all of the little areas. Obviously, it's a single player game, so they're gonna put a you know effort into those areas that you generally don't get online. And because you've got two screens or one screen split that's attached to your head and is centimeters away from your eyes, you're seeing things in so much more detail that certain other things in a game may not be focused on by developers. Like you can pick up the bottle, and if there's liquid in there, you can rotate it. I think that came in an update. I don't think that was there straight away, but like that, and you will see the water, going left and right, like that sort of stuff you don't see in other games. But it's such an immersive experience. Or being able to pick up, like at the start of the game, being able to pick up pens and draw on the window, and then rub it out. Sort of stuff like that you don't see in other games. Again, it's such an interactive experience of picking it up that it's an enjoyable experience. In I don't know, Call of Duty, for example, if you could pick up some sort of pen and start drawing somewhere, yes, you'll probably get that one person on YouTube that'll go crazy and draw some really amazing art, but most people wouldn't care. Whereas with this, when you pick it up and you're just like, oh my god, what happens if I touch the end of the pen to the window? Is he actually going to draw? And then you realize as he draws, it's definitely different experiences. And I think that's one thing, because obviously, you hit on the point, Parker, that as an industry, the developers don't really know how to make VR games per se. There's definitely a few good examples out there, but like with FPS, like you generally know how to do it, to get people happy. MMO, you've got to you know how to do it. Racing games, mobile games, you know that. But whereas with VR, it is the things that work on regular systems, whether that's console, PC, or even mobile, don't necessarily work on that. And like certain things you just don't care about. And you look at some of the most popular games, or the ones that come to mind, like Beat Saber, the Climb, and some of the Oculus, experiences. Those sort of games generally wouldn't, be that interesting on a regular platform. They're very unique, tailor-made experiences. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of effort that needs to be, put into it. Like, have you played much, Adam? Because you're in mobile, and because I played Angry Birds VR, and I actually really enjoy them. Me and my wife enjoy playing the Angry Birds, so it's like a mobile experience in 3D brought to VR.
I actually haven't played Angry Birds in VR. I have actually been quite, you know, ignoring the VR trend until like 5 years ago, maybe. Until one of my good friends, also a game designer, he bought the Oculus Rift, and he invited me over to try it. And for me, it was just we'd have a couple of beers, and I didn't really care about Oculus Rift, but he told me like to give it a try. He invited me. Wow, I I remember that. I mean, I thought it's gonna be 3D, it's gonna be fun, but wow, it was just a completely different experience. It was for me, it was gaming brought to a different level, and I actually, since that day, I was very interested in VR, and I talked to a couple of game developers and investors who invest into game studios, and we've discussed VR numerous times. And one of the most common arguments against VR is like nobody argues that it's a great, it's just gaming brought to a different level, and it's the potential future of gaming. But there are two problems with it that I see. The first problem is that the players need to buy a fairly expensive piece of hardware. Not everybody wants to invest 800, 900, 1,000 euros or dollars or wherever you are, whichever currency you prefer. But it's expensive. And the second issue is that, and I think Parker kind of touched on this already, is that we still don't know how to make proper VR games just yet. I mean, many game studios attempted to make VR games, and they're cool, but there's still the issues of people getting dizzy, for example. Now, can you imagine? We like you said, we all work here. We all know what it feels like to have a hard day when you're just looking forward to coming home and maybe playing your favorite game for an hour or two. And now, can you imagine popping on a VR set, a headset, and getting a headache or getting dizzy? It's a very strong con, one of them for sure. I think this could be a separate topic, maybe for another podcast. But I think the current status quo for VR, one that I agree with, is that it shows potential, but we are not quite there yet. But maybe another topic that's kind of linked with VR is AR, augmented reality. And that's on the other end of the spectrum, right? Because everybody, or almost everybody, has a mobile device. And if you have a mobile device with a camera, and I mean, virtually all mobile phones have cameras, then you can have AR. And to me, that's like the intermediary step to getting to VR. It requires a device, and it provides, it takes the surrounding environment and takes it and provides you a different experience in your environment. And many successful games. I mean, Pokemon Go is a is a great example of a game that uses it to great to with a great success. So VR, I see very complicated, and I think the future. I mean, it shows potential for the future, but we are not quite there. AR is probably where I would put my money on for the near future.
Oh yeah, like AI is definitely a very interesting one. Beyond games as well. Obviously, you've got companies like Snapchat. With their experimentation, obviously, Google was doing their stuff, hasn't really gone anywhere yet. But that provides a lot of potential, gaming potential, social media, and just off it work potential as well. Sort of maybe increase productivity, and then you got Apple with their Vision headset coming out as well. They're saying next year sometime. Probably be early to mid next year most likely. But the other problem with VR, I don't think we've touched on it yet, is the space, physical space required. It's like you could be in a small apartment, have a massive TV, have a PlayStation 5, and you're good to go. Like you can play that. Like even if the TV is not practical for the apartment, you get in there, you're good. Whereas with VR, you need a decent amount of room to play, and then obviously it's dangerous in terms of you might hit a TV, so you could destroy 500, 500 or 1,000 or a 2,000 pound piece of equipment just trying to enjoy something. So yeah, there's that issue, with it as well. It's just the physical room required, and then on top of that, a lot of people have consoles, a lot of people have mobile devices, a lot of people have PCs. So somebody else that has another platform like that. That if you want to, you can interact with them either on PlayStation Network or Xbox, where you're in some sort of party, or you're playing online, or on mobile, some sort of leaderboard thing. Whereas on VR, I don't. I know the odd person that has VR, and that's more just because on Steam, it shows you your friends, and via that, I know, okay, this person has, VR and has played some VR games, but I don't even, those people that I'm referring to, I don't even talk to them anymore. So people that I actively talk to, I don't think I know anyone that has a new modern VR headset.
And you don't talk to them because they have a VR.
No, no, no. Yeah, but no, it's just because we've just gone our separate ways. They were people I knew 15, 20 years ago, and or like 10 years ago, and they've stayed on my account, and I'm on their friends list, but we don't interact anymore. Like we're not at college or university together, for example.
It's because they're playing all those single player VR games. You don't even talk to them online.
Yeah, they're enjoying Half Life, Alex, instead of playing with me.
I don't know. I can see a world where like somebody comes out and is like makes this amazing game and it's like so fun. And like if there's like that driving force for players, I think people will like get it. I just don't think like I think that was kind of like that's always kind of the case with a lot of consoles too, right? Like when the consoles were first coming out, they always try to pair it up with these like launch titles that will draw the people in. I don't like I just see like the argument that like yeah, like VR makes you nauseous. Like it's especially if it's implemented poorly. If the game doesn't like design around it, doesn't give you options for moving around. That's doesn't that's like different from a joystick, or like it's like yeah, like it's expensive, but people also spend a lot of money on PCs as well. or like consoles are a couple $100, and you can get like even like an older VR headset for like not that much more money. But I think like the biggest kind of problem I see is just like why do you want to play a VR game when like there's no fun VR games to play? I mean like like yeah, like people do like Beat Saber, and but like paying a couple $100 for like Beat Saber doesn't really make sense. But like say somebody made like the Halo equivalent of a VR headset, that like revolutions control, like has like smooth feeling aim assist that makes you feel like you're really good, even if if you didn't have aim assist you wouldn't be able to hit jack. Like it just kind of feels like if there is a reason for people to play these things, it will just naturally kind of push the the medium forward. But we just don't like have that yet, because like there's like like you walk down the street and you ask people what are their favorite games, nobody's saying Half-Life Alex. It was a cool experiment, it was a cool game, but nobody's out there being like this is the best game ever. And I spent like hundreds of hours in this game. Like nobody's saying that about any VR game. um Although I guess there are Beat Saber pros. But like it like I think like people kind of look at VR and like point out like, oh, it makes you nauseous, like, oh, it's just not gonna work because of these like inherent things about VR. But like I don't think that's necessarily right. I think like it's going to just take one idea that really clicks with VR, that's going to kind of push like get everybody on the bandwagon. And we just haven't really seen that yet.
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree with this. I That's kind of the point I was trying to make. That right now there's just so many hurdles, right? If you want to have a good VR experience, so people who have VR, they know they want to. They're already interested in VR, whereas there's not many great VR games, and it just takes one visionary who's gonna develop a great VR game. It's gonna get 10 out of 10 everywhere, all across reviews. VR sales are gonna spike, and other developers are gonna learn from this experience. We just didn't get there yet. Uh,
Yeah.
like I said, it's just so expensive to well, it's not like the most expensive thing, but it's extra pieces of hardware that you need without there being any meaningful, fun VR games right now. So it's really for the VR aficionados as it stands. So you completely
Yeah.
nailed it.
And I don't know if it's gonna be even like a visionary to come around and just make that one game. I think it's just gonna be like game, like somebody's gonna make another game, and then there's gonna be techniques in there that gets like applied. Because like even like we look at first person shooter games, there's a lot of techniques that's been around for more than like a decade at this point. Like like Halo feels that way, and like you can kind of feel the DNA of that in Destiny. And because like it's coming from the same code base at the root of it. But also like the kind of design principles are really similar in terms of how the character moves and how the auto aim works and how the air steering works and all that. you know and but like if you can go back and like you can find these articles of people being like amazed that somebody figured out that a game can have the left stick be for move, or actually I think it was like the WASD was for movement and the mouse was for looking around, and that was like a revolutionary idea for a first person game, back when like people were first starting to figure out like 3D graphics was possible. It's just like looking back in now, it's like hilarious. Like, well, yeah, no, that's how you make a first person game, and that's like how everybody does it now. But I think ideas like that will just slowly kind of build up over time, and people will be like, okay, we got to make a VR game. What do we need? Well, okay, we're gonna get somebody to get these control techniques into the game, and then we're gonna get somebody to like implement these things in the game, and it's not gonna be just like some visionary that's just like ideas popping out, and every idea that the person comes up with is like a genius revolutionary idea. It's more like the person just like took all the good ideas in the game, and then like a little bit of like iteration on top of that, and then people are like, oh yeah, that's cool, and then like they add on top of that a little bit, and like they add on top of that, and over like a course of a decade we get to a point where it's become much more mainstream, and people are like, yeah, like this is like a thing that we love doing, like this is like a game that we love playing, and like all my friends play. But like getting to that level is like a just like layers and layers and layers of people iterating and coming up with small ideas that are just built up to that level, right?
I think the hardware requires that level of iteration too. I think that's, as has been correctly noted by everyone, one of the biggest limiting factors. But if it's as easy as putting on a pair of normal glasses and picking up a controller for the bulk of users and not prohibitively expensive, the market can grow. I will say that the market is like a dedicated niche. The enthusiasts who can afford those rigs have money, so they'll buy games. I I know people from when I worked at Frostbite in Stockholm who went and founded Fast Travel Games, and they're still around and today kicking. And they've released multiple titles, and they only do VR games. So that I don't know if it's like arcades where it's going to go through this period of time where it's like there's this crash, like a VR crash. Although there might be some signs that that could happen, like what Meta talking about their sales. Um, they're pretty anemic. So do their sales reflect the size of the market, or do they reflect like that there was an early interest and people played it and then they moved on? If it's the latter, then I think it's going to take even longer for the technology and the nature of the state of the art and how to make games for VR, um, because it has so little revenue to sustain itself on if it's going to have a great retraction. I hope not. I don't find it particularly that appealing, even though I've tried a few games. Um, and I also think it's funny that I know several people who are VR snobs that they only play VR games and they call other games flat games.
It's probably the way how some people think of mobile games as less of a game. It's not as hardcore as console and PC. Then you get the PC gamers thinking that the console games aren't as hardcore as PC using a keyboard and mouse. And then you got the VR gamers. I personally don't know anyone that just plays VR. Like I have multiple VR headsets. It's been a little while since I've played VR. I always have fun. Like every time I'll play a VR experience, whether it is a more hardcore game like Half-Life Alyx, or it's a more of a casual experience like Super Hard or Beat Saber, for example. I always have fun. I always do enjoy it. But again, it is that thing of, am I really in the mood for it? And I think that's what mobile has done so well. And then obviously other casual games on consoles like is it what's that game called where you're that little character running about? You gotta make sure you don't fall down. Do you know the one? Fallout guys?
Death
Fallout?
Stranding.
No, no, no,
Something with Flappy Bird, no?
no, 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 no.
Oh, you're talking about
It's on console. It
like
was
you're
free on
walking around and
PlayStation Plus. Fallout guys? No, no, no.
Fall Guys.
Fall Guys. Yes, that's the one.
Oh.
Man, I mentioned the game. You guys remember Flappy Bird from like?
Yes.
Oh my goodness, worst reference ever.
Yeah, but I mean, for that little short period of time that Don Gwen had it on the App Store before he took it down, he was making I think $50,000 a day from what I remember.
Until I think until Nintendo sued him for the
Yeah,
assets.
yeah, that as well. But I remember me and my friend talking about it. It's just like, not only is $50,000 a lot, he was in Vietnam where things are cheap anyway. So he must have been living like a king, like
Yeah.
like royalty over there.
Yeah, such a simple game, and and there has been like a game similar to that one that are made until today. Nowhere near
Yeah.
with the success though.
No, no, no. It's usually one of those things that you just don't see it coming at all. And obviously, a lot of people didn't with Flappy Bird. But yeah, like talking back about VR. Obviously, we have these titles, and like there's times I want to play VR. So I'm looking at one of my VR headsets now, and I'm looking at it because right now it's 9:40 p.m. It's almost 10 o'clock at night where I am, and I'm like, after this podcast, if I get any chance to game, yeah, I would love for it to be VR, but one, it's hot, and you get even hotter in a VR headset, so that's a turn off right there. Two, I've got to make a bit of room, but I can do that or have a sit down experience. But then there's the other thing, like with mobile and these other games, it just there's a sort of titles that you just put on, you whack it on your phone, it's instantly ready, and you could go from this room to the kitchen to outside to your car. You take it with you, just enjoy it, put it down. And same with some of those console experiences as well, where there's not much to it. You just get in there once it's loaded. You can have 20-30 minutes, and you're going to have 20-30 minutes of gameplay and of, fun as well. Whereas with VR, you definitely have to be more in the mode for it. Same with obviously like a single player game versus a mobile game. You have to be more okay. I've got a decent amount of time, and I'm in the mindset of wanting to enjoy single player. And I think obviously that is the issue with VR. But yeah, like obviously what Parker was saying about the types of experiences, and somebody, either a developer company, coming along, because I remember, you was talking about the first person. I don't know what the original game was, but that did, WASD and the mouse or keyboard and mouse for a FPS. Because I remember, because I know when I sometimes go back and have a little retro phase, when I play some older '90s PC games, I all forget that the looking around, the camera movement is done using the keyboard, and I'll be like, oh, come on, like it's so it just does not feel right. And that's what it is. There'll be something that'll come along, whether it's a game genre, a gameplay experience, maybe even a hardware thing, possibly. Some sort of import or some cheaper, base level of hardware. Like obviously, Quest has really brought the price down and allowed people to really get into it compared to PC, based VR with cables as well. And then everyone else will just start copying, and they'll be like, okay, that's just working. It's like once the first person did the WASD, the keyboard and mouse, everyone started doing it. It just became the norm. And like you said, Parker, if a FPS game or even any PC game outside of, I guess, racing games, came out today and it wasn't a hybrid of keyboard and mouse and it was just keyboard, just mouse could potentially work for, some click-based games and, some turn-based games. But for the most part, if it's not keyboard and mouse, you're going to be disappointed. And that's where you'll be. I mean, what could be interesting is if one of the big console manufacturers, so Microsoft or Sony, and I think Sony is more likely, to do it because they've already got the VR headset that they've released, two versions of it, is package it in. And but again, that's the problem is the price. Microsoft did that with Kinect. They reversed that decision afterwards, and it was something that they, just didn't go back to because it hurt the sales. So as a result, it's they could package it in, but unless they take a huge hit, they're gonna have to increase the price, and people aren't gonna like that. They're gonna say you're forcing me to have a VR headset even though I don't want it and pay an extra $150 for it.
Yeah, I I think including it in a console could really move the market, but that's hard to do, and it doesn't necessarily work because you had Kinect with the original Xbox, or not the original Xbox, but it came out for the Xbox 360 and then was included with Xbox One for a while, and that was an example of it not working out to bundle the hardware. There are a variety of reasons. We could probably go into that generation on a different podcast panel, but if it was like very likely that this was going to be a, a big console, like I think it would take PlayStation doing it, like bundling it.
Oh yeah, because Microsoft obviously 100% internally they've developed headsets. The amount of R&D they've got, they've obviously looked into it, and then because they've got the AR stuff as well. It's being used in like the medical field, for example, and other fields, and teaching, for example. So yeah, they've definitely looked into it, but PlayStation have released it, and imagine if like PlayStation and Facebook or Meta said, let's team up, let's do something, and let's just try and take on Microsoft effectively. Because obviously, I'd say Oculus is definitely the one that has the most VR experience, in general, and I think some sort of combination of the two could definitely provide some interesting features. But again, it is, I think, the cost, bundling it in probably. Yeah, it's probably not going to work because the consoles already are not cheap. A PlayStation 5 in the UK, if you buy the disc version, is £400+. It was 450 when it came out, then it went up to 475, and now you can get it at a discount in most places, brand new, from anywhere between 4 and 425. But again, it's still a lot of money for people. And then on top of that, you're saying I might charge you an extra 150 to 200, even though that's cheaper than buying the console and the headset separately. If they don't want to buy the headset and they just want to play Fortnite on there, like a free to play game, they're gonna be like, why am I buying this? Again, that was the same with the Kinect.
Yeah, to make the economics work, they usually have to squeeze something else. And in the case of the Xbox One, the compromise was on the speed of the graphics card inside the Xbox One. It was not as fast as the PlayStation 4 version, and they did that for cost reasons. I think. I mean, I didn't work there, so I can't say.
Most likely.
But I can't get away from this idea that they did that to save money on the box because they were including Connect. And they didn't want it to be like, oh, it's $700 because there's a Connect in it. I think they correctly anticipated that that would be a deal breaker, but I think they failed to anticipate that the Connect didn't have legs. It wasn't going to be a key differentiator in that cycle that they hoped it would. And they introduced it, I think, to kind of compete with Nintendo's Wii, which got a lot of attention, but also as a platform didn't have a lot of legs. So I think it's very tricky, and I'm sure these conversations have happened internally at all these big hardware. Like, should we do anything in VR, and if so, what? And Sony's the only one doing anything of the big three. Uh, I think Nintendo's out of that arena forever, given Virtual Boy. But Nintendo is always a company that will surprise as well. I mean, I wouldn't have predicted they would have shipped cardboard piano. So I think they're always doing something that no one else is thinking of.
And those cardboard attachments, they charge a fair bit of money for it, and people bought them.
Yes, Nintendo also has the ability to do things that if other companies attempted them would be roundly criticized and dismissed.
Yeah, and when Nintendo does it, they say it's innovative, it's different. It's like only Nintendo could have done it. But you're right. If Microsoft tried to release, I don't know, let's say some $50 cardboard, like just talking about it, some cardboard attachment, people would be like, "What the hell?" Nintendo does it, and they're like, "Oh, it's Mario, so it's fine," or whatever the game is. He wasn't even really Mario, but it was some other game. But yeah, that's an interesting point. Connect was really just the response to the Wii, and I think it was a matter of, even though it didn't pan out long term, for them. Obviously, Wii U was a failure, and with the Switch, was a bit. Even though it has motion tech in there, majority of players, I think, are really using it as either a portable console where they're not really doing much motion, or as a console that's connected to their TV, kind of like a PlayStation and Xbox. Again, not doing much motion with it as well. But I think Microsoft was, I guess, rightfully so, scared that if Nintendo not only did well with the motion, and motion was going to be the thing going forward, what happens to them if they don't do it? And so they tried it, but nobody really cared after the Wii.
Yeah, I would I don't know. It's admittedly a small sample size, but my kids, they use the motion controls in games even when they're playing docked. So I think the motion controls are appealing to a certain segment of the audience, and that segment of that audience is very large on the Switch. So, of course, we
But
don't have
would
the data. I assume Nintendo has data on how many people actually use the motion control features of games.
Yeah, but the question is, would your kids, whatever the game is on Switch, for example, especially if it's a Switch exclusive like Mario, would they not buy the game if it didn't have that? Like, Super Mario Odyssey has some motion, features in there, but I definitely know I would still buy it if it didn't have it. That just happened to be in it.
No, they would definitely pick the game based on what the gameplay is, and if it had motion control, they would use it if they enjoyed it. But for example, my son, he played Splatoon for a very long time using the motion controls to steer the character. And when I found out that's what he was doing, and I'm like, oh, you're going to do a lot better in multiplayer if you get good with the sticks, because I don't think you have the response time that the other players have.
I mean, did he switch over, or is he still using motion?
I should ask him. I don't know.
Yeah, I know how it is. When you put on a game and the motion's enabled by default, either for aiming or for driving, steering, for example, and you don't quite realize, but when they have the feature built in that you can still use the sticks, so you'll be using the sticks, you'll be fine, and then naturally as you're just shuffling, just moving your physical position, you're just like, why is it going left, even though I'm moving it right, or I'm not moving it, and then you realize motion's on. So there's obviously that side of it, but yeah, I mean, Wii was definitely a very fun console. It's something that I have hooked up, and if given the option, like if somebody said to me, like my wife said or friend said, we're around, let's play the Wii, I'm definitely taking them up on it, because it's an enjoyable experience. But it is one of those things. It was a strange period, but I think it also coincided with mobile, because before mobile, the Wii came out, you got a lot of non-gamers into it, but then mobile came out, in '07, then '07 with the iPhone, '08 with the App Store, then like the early 2010s really started ramping up, and by then the Wii was not dead, but it was getting onto the Wii U, and like those non-hardcore gamers, they had just started playing Angry Birds, Flappy Bird, Candy Crush, all those other games, and they wasn't interested in, playing Wii bowling anymore. They're more interested in Angry Birds. That was just a lot easier for them. And you will see people that are still using like motion controls, but on their mobile device. And then obviously they tried to make it a serious console Wii U with like better hardware, but then that wasn't competing with PS4 and Xbox either. So it was just in a position where, unfortunately, it just didn't work out for them. But they definitely did a good job with the Nintendo Switch. Sold well. A lot of people love it. Hopefully, the Switch, either the Switch Pro or the Switch 2, that should. I'm predicting next year it will come out. I think that will be very interesting as well. I feel like they're not going to do anything too crazy after the Wii U. I feel like it will just be a more powerful version with maybe obviously bigger screen and all that jazz, and maybe a little lighter.
Better
So
cardboard.
yeah, you better cardboard. Maybe this time they'll, instead of cardboard, they'll ship an old thin plastic. Yeah, yeah, that whole cardboard. But the couple of people that I know that played it and bought it, they really have positive things to say about the experience. I think partly because it's Nintendo, everyone loves Nintendo, but partly Nintendo does make good fun experiences. The experiences they make, like they don't make a Call of Duty or an Uncharted, but they make a Mario and a Mario Kart and Splatoon, and even if it's not them themselves, like their platforms attract certain titles, and those titles are done really well. So we can make fun of some of those titles, but again, they're really fun, and everyone does love those titles. So you know let's start wrapping up. One thing, as you guys all know, but for the audience, I always have some more fun questions. But the fun questions, obviously, I'm going to keep it a little bit different because we're on a panel. The first one will actually be similar to the regular type of questions. It will be what what's everyone's favorite game, and what game is everyone looking forward to play.
Well, I what's my favorite game? Jeez. I just picked up Baldur's Gate 3, but it's too early to say if it's my favorite game yet. um,
Well, it's good though. Then if you're even talking about it in this
well, I can't
question.
say the reason I bought it is because it got. I think it has like historically the best Metacritic ratings. I can't say yet. I just played a couple of hours. I did enjoy Diablo 4 until geez, the best. Well, I'm gonna go with Elden Ring. It's just perfect.
Okay. And what game are you looking forward to?
Ah, okay. I'm gonna say I'm really curious what Diablo 4 DLCs are gonna look like because it's just I just feel the game has such a strong potential, but they're not there yet. And I'm just curious if they're gonna strike home with their DLCs. I think the game has strong potential, so I hope they get it right. So I'm gonna go with Diablo 4 DLC.
Okay. I mean, they've definitely done a lot of good things right with the core game. So I think as long as they don't rush it, I think they'll do a good job with, Diablo 4 DLC as
Yeah,
well.
fingers crossed. I mean, I'm saying this as a player, like not even as a PM, but they also screwed up with a couple of the updates. Like they had to revert on them, like after the community backlash. So yeah, I'm really rooting for them. And as a player, I really want to see the game, become what it has the potential to become.
Yeah, be very interesting. How about you, Parker? Favorite game and favorite, I mean, game that you're looking forward to?
I mean, I feel like my answer is probably changing every time I answer this, but I mean, like recently, I think I mentioned I got into Total War games, and that's been an incredible experience. So, if you take the recent timeline, I'll say Total War games, the Warhammer games, the Total War Warhammer games are awesome. But just like all time, it's like Sekiro is up there. I really, really like that game. Really like a big FromSoft fanboy. Um, yeah, looking forward to I mean Elden Ring DLC when um um that's but I mean I don't know when that's ever gonna come out. Um uh but yeah, other than that, I haven't like really been following too much because all the studios that I really really enjoy, they haven't announced anything since their last releases. So yeah, I'm not. I guess I'll just have to say like Elden Ring DLC.
Okay. And what about you, Evan?
Well, I'm in a similar situation. I already answered this question on the last pod, so I'll change my answer, but I'll contextualize that. So if I rewind to my college days before Bungie was acquired the first time, and now that they've been acquired 3 times, no, 2 times, no, three. I guess if Activision is included, they released Myth One and Myth Two, Soulblighter. Those games were awesome. They were ahead of their time. Um, they had amazingly short matches for the types of games they were on multiplayer that worked on a dial-up modem. Um, they were really cool. The single player was great, quite challenging. So if you want to, I don't know if you can get it on Good Old Games or anything, but yeah, you go in the Wayback Machine. Too bad it like Take Two owns the IP, and there was a Myth 3 made by another studio, but it kind of wasn't. The series wasn't continued. And what I'm looking forward to, probably Spider-Man 2, the Insomniac Spider-Man game, because I played 2019 with the twins, and we had a blast playing it. So I assume we'll have another great time with that game.
Oh yeah, Spider-Man 2, definitely a game I'm looking forward to. Really loved, first Spider-Man, of the new ones and Miles Morales as well. Both great games. And next one on PlayStation 5 as well. It's gonna be amazing. Obviously, Stalker 2 coming out. Hope I think is I think I don't know if it was a leak or if it was an actual release date, but of December. But that should hopefully be soon as well. So Stalker, I'm interested in getting my hands on or favorite game of all time. If I had to just pick one quickly, it would be Half-Life 2. And another game I'm looking forward to is hopefully another Half-Life game. If they ever, get around, actually release it, it would be Half-Life. And Alex was a very pleasant surprise when they announced that. I remember when I read it, because I was just ready on my phone, and he was just scrolling. I was like, "Now this must be fake." But as like anything with Half-Life, I had to double check. I checked it. I was like, IGN, GameSpot, and a couple of other big ones are reporting on it. I was like, let me make sure it's not some mod or something, because it was like Half-Life Alex. It wasn't like Half-Life 3, Half-Life 2, Episode 3. It was Half-Life Alex. I was like, let me make sure it's no mod. And then I was like, this is real. So yeah, hopefully they release a new Half-Life, and that would be my game that I'm looking forward to. But there's plenty of games. Starfield's just come out. I need to download that. I'm happy it's on Game Pass, so I can go and grab that. I might set that to download overnight tonight and see if I can get some time over the weekend to, play it. So I just want to thank, everyone, Parker, Evan, Adam, for coming on the podcast, for being involved and being part of the first, panel for FireDEV. It was a blast. It was good, talking with everyone about, single player, about, VR, multiplayer, and also everyone's, favorite games. So, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. It was nice to meet you all. Hit me up on LinkedIn if you want to be connected there. And I appreciate the invite.
Yeah, thank you guys. Really enjoyed this.
So yeah, anyone that's interested in listening to Parker One's, Evan Bell's, Adam's, Zelenay's podcast, the solo one, there'll be links in the description, and I'll see everyone else in the next episode of FireDEV. Bye bye.